pump. So they do stuff. That hiatus can be very long, you know.
Right. See, I also heard that if it's too hot, they won't set.
Well, yeah, that's true of salination in general, I think.
So last year, I blamed it on a combination of heat and nitrogen. Well, 2 years ago, I blamed it on heat and nitrogen because we planted it in a heavy veg cover crop. Well, anyway, they do not need the...
Right.
The summer vegetables need as much nitrogen as the spring ones, but they need it over a longer period when the soil is warm and if you have a biologically active, well-fed soil, it's going to pump out nutrients at the rate that those crops need. You can grow sweet corn that way, hardly any side dress. And if your soil is, if your phosphorus is low, then today go ahead and use the compost. If the phosphorus is high, you limit the compost to match the phosphorus removal, or if it's excessive, you want to really minimize it. And then use the legumes and then the side dress with the low phosphorus organic sources, which seed meals, feather meal, blood meal. Okay, potassium deficiency, you get tattered leaves like that. Just the edges are kind of beat up, and they're kind of either yellow or brown or bleached out. Potassium does not integrate into organic matter the way nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur do. It's just a cation. It never forms covalent bonds, doesn't become part of larger compounds, but it just adsorbs to the cation exchange capacity. And most soils that have any clay in them, that are not just silt and sand, will have insoluble mineral potassium reserves. And cereal grains, grasses, and trees are really good at releasing some of that mineral fixed potassium. So you can mine quite a bit of potassium out of your deep subsoil, but over the very long run, you really want to find, we need to find a better way to really close that potassium cycle. And that's what I've been scratching my head about for a while.
How about human manure, human waste?
We're going to have to find a way to get it safely onto the land. Sewage sludge ain't it because
no, of course not. But what urine...
We're going to have to all get off of pharmaceuticals, too.
Yeah. Urine is a piece of cake if we're off of pharmaceuticals. Yeah.
Right.
It's very easy to have urine to be safe. Yeah.
Right.
It's just a matter of time.
It needs a compost pile, great, too.
Oh, yeah. You can go to compost, it'll really cook it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you can build up K surpluses in soil, but they're easy to draw down because a lot of crops need so much of it. If you get an imbalance, you have a high potassium, low calcium, you can get blossom end rot, tip burn, high potassium, low magnesium, and the livestock has that grass tetany issue. Okay, it can leach from really sandy soils. It's not considered a pollutant. It's just mineral. Okay, I mentioned that just now. There's a couple of compound NPK fertilizers. There's manure culture litter-based fertilizers like Fertrel or Harmony. Okay, magnesium deficiency, it's the older leaves, but the veins stay green. It looks a lot like nitrogen, but the veins will stay green. And deficiencies will occasionally occur. It's usually when the cation exchange base saturation of magnesium is below 10, especially on a sandy soil where that also means your total is low. I mean, a very sandy soil with a very low cation exchange, you want your magnesium between 20 and 30. Again, it leaches a little bit like calcium. Sources, calcium. Again, like the other cations, it's just as a on the cation exchange. Of course, some soil minerals, especially limestones, will be rich in it. Counteract subsoil aluminum toxicity when you have the soil as well as acid. If your pH is 6 and higher, you usually don't have enough. The only thing is, I mean, if your magnesium base saturation is more than half of your calcium, you might be getting the gray zone of concern about a really serious imbalance. If they're equal, or if magnesium is actually greater than calcium, it's usually related to the inherent mineralogical condition of the soil you're on, like something called serpentine, which occurs out west. I don't know if we've ever had it over in this part of the country. But calcium deficiency, well, one way it occurs is these localized deficiencies, the blossom end rot. And that's more of a matter of the balance. And sometimes it's a water balance, like swings between wet and dry will sometimes disrupt the plant's ability to get calcium to the critical growing points in the fruits. Okay, sulfur. Now that hits the youngest leaves and they turn evenly yellow. It looks a lot like nitrogen, except it comes in the younger part of the plant first. And sulfate sulfur is the form that plants use, and it's also quite leachable. And the deficiency, as I mentioned earlier, will occur on the sandy soils and also in the seedling stage, not so much later on. And let's see. Okay, micronutrients. These are the ones that are most often considered essential for plant growth. Iron deficiency will cause that interveinal or mottled chlorosis, but it's in the young part of the plant. Some of the other micronutrients look similar, the manganese, copper, and zinc, but not exactly. I mean, it varies in how it manifests in different plants. So if you have something funny, you have odd discolorations or mottling like this, two things to check for is micronutrient deficiency and virus. You want to find out what's going on and which one it is. And NOP does allow you to use sulfates. You don't even have to wait for your crop to look like that. You can do it if you have a low soil or foliar test. Okay, and boron deficiency, very common. That's a typical acute boron deficiency. That's what I was seeing in the tomatoes when I thought I had virus or herbicide damage. Cultivator is a good source of zinc and copper. So cultivator compost, if your phosphorus, zinc, and copper are low, and your calcium is also low, your pH is low, it's a good match because it has some lining capacity as well. Molybdenum is sometimes an issue related to support for nitrogen fixation enzymes.
Well, you can't really see the deficiency, you just see it in the test.
Usually.
Yeah, it doesn't show up.
What, in a molybdenum? It might. Well, it will show up in some kind of plant study. Yeah. All right. Any questions? Thanks for your patience.
Certainly appreciate it. Where would be the best way to find whether the ANL or the NCDA is more appropriate for a given growing situation?
It's your choice. Pick a lab and stick with it.
And they're free in the NCDA. I mean, it's
ANL is affordable. Oh, quickly, just some text that I recommend. Actually, this is why I don't do any kind of tax evasion. There are a few of our tax dollars extremely well used. The SERI program came out with this book, the third edition. It's a good basic manual to have on hand. Building soils for better crops. And then they've come out with one on cover cropping, managing cover crops profitably. And there's a couple others I didn't bring. One is the crop rotation manual. Another one is on insect management, ecological insect management. And they've also upgraded their website so that it's very easy to get on and say, okay, I want to find out everything that anybody who's had a SERI grant has researched and found out about, let's say, onions or onion pest management or organic soybean production or how to prevent parasite diseases in sheep or something. This is one I read. This is kind of a nice introduction to the soil food web, soil life. This one I'm working my way through. Gary Zimmer, the biological farmer. Overall, a lot of common sense, but I find him a little more hung up on calcium than I am. A little bit more precise on that. So I'm about halfway through it. I'm kind of giving it a chance. A lot of people work with his system and are quite successful. And then lastly, I'm not necessarily recommend you invest $120 in this one, but this is the Nature and Properties of Soils. This is the, actually, yeah, this is the most recent edition of, there's a new one coming out of the sort of the Soil Science Bible. And there's a lot of technical information, but I will sometimes go here because what's happened is a lot of the kind of popular, how would I describe this? There are a lot of soil consultants who are working with organics who kind of come at it with a fixed formula. And that's what my biggest critique of the whole Albrecht-Kinsey system. They have a very set of ideal ranges for all these different nutrients, and they try to make every soil conform to that. And what I learned so much more thoroughly from this book than I knew before was that not only are there orders or large groups of soils that vary different, in a very fundamental way, but that every soil is an individual. And I say, take what nature has given you, work with it as best you can, and use, you know, as little as you can get away with, as much as you need in the way of imported amendments to make that soil work for you. So if I've got an Altasol, which is like a very aged, very old southern soil, about 3/4 of our soils in the Carolinas are Altasols, and they got red clay, and my calcium is 58% and my magnesium is 30%, I'm not going to try to dump enough calcitic lime and micronutrient supplements to make it look like the mollisols, the prairie soils, which are bottomless topsoil that are not overly aged or leached, to make it look like one of those. It's just not going to happen.
See, those Midwest farmers really don't like to hear that from you. I was at Acres USA, and Ron and Brinkley were just ducking from the flack from people who had seen your writings on that, and they were just furious. You know,
Oh, Eric, you would hear a great story. Okay, I did this research. You see, when I actually had a soil that seized up on me because I overloaded the potassium, and I didn't keep up with the organic matter. I overloaded the potassium by using a lot of hay mulch that I cut from another field. And all of a sudden, the earthworms disappeared, and the slugs came at a great plague. And I sent it to one of these students of the Albrecht Kinsey School, and he wrote back and said, calcitic lime, your P to K, your P to K ratio, and your magnesium calcium ratio off. And I said, okay, and I put the calcitic limestone on. I saw a little improvement, and I thought, wow, I wonder if this is a huge missing link. So I wrote up a proposal to the SERI program and a proposal to the OFRF, and they both funded me. They kind of matched each other for 3 years. I had 5 sites studying. Okay, I take the soil test, and I put on amendments to push this towards the Albrecht formula, and I put on amendments only to provide sufficiency and to try to keep the cation ratios where they are over here. I did a side-by-side comparison. And meanwhile, I did a literature review of like 100 different writings, pro and con, and I came up with this middle-of-the-road approach to what I call common sense nutrient balancing. I mean, if your pH is 5.5 and you're trying to grow brassicas and your calcium is 50% and your magnesium is 30%, for heaven's sakes, use calcitic limestone, even if you have to ship it in from the next state. But if your pH is 6.8 and your magnesium is 30%, and your calcium is, let's say, 65%, and everything is balanced, and there's earthworms all through your soil, and everything's doing great, don't mess with gypsum. You don't need it. Your soil's fine. No, anyway. And then I had this thought. I said, I know that soils respond slowly to organic practices or changes in practices or sustainable practices. So I go, okay, I'm going to do this study for 3 more years. I'm going to continue these same sites and really just maintain that differential and see if I start to see shifts in the biology and the yields or whatever. I hadn't seen much so far. And so I wrote a proposal back to SERI. Okay, they turned me down. Well, that's fine. This, you know, they have to make their choices and choose what's most. But I was a little ticked that 2 of the reviewers said, this guy's obviously biased in favor of the Albrecht-Kinsey theory, and his literature review is weak and subjective. And I said, what do you mean? 3/4 of them were debunking the idea, and there was over 100 references, and I'm taking a neutral viewpoint and saying, the jury is still out, and if you turn me down because there are other juries more important, I can understand that. But don't tell me that I'm biased. That's why I came back, because I ain't biased. Meanwhile, in the same stretch of time, 3 different disciples of the Albrecht system called me on the carpet for misapplying their system and then claiming it didn't work. One guy I didn't know called me from Maine, and he said, you know, just because you can't play the piano doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the piano. And we had this long discussion, and he irritated me just enough that I went ahead and took the beginning and the intermediate course with Neil Kinsey. And at first I was getting taken in by it, and then I kind of backed off, and I said, you know, it seems so, you know, it's like we're trying to fit all soils into one cookie cutter, into one huge complex formula. And I said, I said, what about if you have a hard pan? What about if there's no soil life? Won't some of these problems respond to chisel plowing, composting, and cover cropping. And you know what he said to me? Fix the chemistry, and the biology and the physics will take care of themselves. And what's so funny is I then went and took an Elaine Ingham workshop.
Right, she says the opposite.
Yeah, and I went like this, and I said, suppose you got a hard pan, or suppose your potassium is 0.8% saturation, and I want a little potassium sulfate on it. And she said, fix the biology, and the chemistry and physics will take care of themselves. You know what I say? Look at the chemistry, which is what soil tests are about. Look at the physics, which we didn't get around to because I blabbered too long on cover crops. But this thing will tell you a lot about physics. You have to use it when soil moisture is adequate, because dry soil is hard, period, in the end. But you go out when there's been good rains, poke that in. This gauge should not go higher than about 200 in the top 6 inches, and not higher than about 300 on down to, the ideal soil is less than 200 to about a foot, and then less than 300 right to the hill, 27. My soil at home does that, and that's why I can have low phosphorus and grow beautiful crops that never have a purple leaf unless they're senescent. And that one soil that I showed you where the crops weren't growing, I got in 3 inches, and I had my entire weight on here. It was at about 600, which is about twice the level that most crop roots can bust through, and maybe probably greater than what even a sorghum Sudan root can bust through. So, and sometimes it was improper tillage or just natural hardness, and not lack of biology or lack of calcium. So I say you gotta look at all three.
But that biology sure is a lot cheaper than chemistry.
Hmm?
You can go with biology, it's a whole lot cheaper.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yeah, although in my case, if your chemistry is, you need 2 pounds of boron per acre every 3 years, you know,
Yeah.
I can buy a bag of boron for 50 bucks and it's
Right.
done for 5 or 10 years.
Right. But I've known plenty of farmers that just were not patient and just put down enough phosphorus to have the maximum, the ideal amount in 1 year. And I was just like, you're going to be in trouble later on. You know, and I actually lost a consulting job because I wouldn't do that. You know, I just said, don't do it, you know.
So you went to it, how recently did you go to this workshop where they were still furious at my results?
That was 2006.
Oh good.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll live it down before I croak.
Well, I mean, I would have stood up for you, but it was just like, it was a slaughter, you know. I mean, Ron and Brinkley were just ducking, you know.
Who's Ron and Brinkley?
Ron Morris and Brinkley were there. That's
Oh,
how
they were.
That's how it came up.
Because they were on my butt for going middle of the road on cation exchange.
No, they actually just it came up that you were all associated with Virginia Tech, and so then they just went on. They went on about you, and Ron and Brinkley were just trying to get out of the fray, you know.
Oh God, they never told me about that.
Well, they wouldn't. I mean, because they weren't very brave about it. I mean, I wasn't either. It's like, these people are off the wall. Just let them go, you know. I mean. You know.
So they were assuming that I was Virginia Tech, and because I was Virginia Tech, I was full of compost starting material. Was that the whole thing?
No, they associate you with Virginia Tech because they'd seen, you know, stuff that you'd done with Ron and Brinkley.
Right.
And because of that, when they saw Virginia Tech, they just went on about you because they were looking to go on about you because they were mad that you had gone against the great holy Kerry Reams and, you know, and...
Oh, Kerry Reams doesn't make any sense. He has this P to K ratio at 2 to 1.
Yeah,
well, my P to K ratio is 1 to 8 because that's the ratio the plants use the nutrients in.
Yeah. Well, these people we were all into that kind of Midwest soil, you know, soil balancing stuff and mineral balancing stuff, and they just wanted to complain to somebody, and Ron and Brinkley were the targets, and I just kept my mouth shut and watched it, you know.
It's just a Sari producer grant for
I remember you asking me to be part of it, and I remember going, you know, I'd like to know about this, but I'm not a good enough record keeper. So I didn't respond, you know.
Oh, when I asked you to...
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I thought I won't do a good job, and that'll mess up.
Well, it's probably good you stayed out of it so you wouldn't get bodily thrown out of one of these Midwest ag trips.
So any closing statements?
Thank you.
Yay.
Did everybody sign the list when you came in?
She had all the info.
Yeah.
If you did it online, it's all good. Thank you.
Appreciate the people
I'll see you.
and for bringing these very knowledgeable people and being knowledgeable yourself.
You're very welcome. Absolutely. Your name is?
Matthew Lambert.
Sure.
Matthew. Pleasure to meet
Your
you.
name is?
I'm Taylor.
Taylor, right.
Come again. Spread the word.
Absolutely.
Do you work here
People
at this
know when
farm?
we went around.
I'll get this.
Well,
Interest
if
implement
you're here in the
that.
summer, the next ones are going to be great.
All right.
Yeah. June and July and August are going to be. Ron Morris, who I was just talking about, is going to be doing some really great stuff about cover cropping and low till production and stuff like that. And nitrogen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.